Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other tangent that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through this channel, you're sure to waste a few minutes listening to what I have to say and hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube on Wednesday nights around 9:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. This week I will be out of town for the live stream, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to record ahead of time and we're going to run a premiere on Wednesday night. My hope is to be present in the chat thread, to be able to respond to anything, give any commentary, do anything that you guys might want while the video is premiering. But if you don't happen to see it during that time frame, you come along afterwards, you can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com, and that is also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and even some one-off tasting notes. I've gotten away from that in the last few months, but I spent a good part of today going out and snapping some pictures of different bottles that I need to run through to do some tastings with, and so hopefully we'll get that geared back up again. Today is April the 20th of 2020, and we're going to talk about spirits and smoke. If you are unfamiliar with what the international symbol of April the 20th is, well, then this video is probably not for you, but it is 420, folks. So we're going to talk about cannabis, hemp, whiskey, how that all plays a role in the state of Kentucky. I don't have any pre-show anything, like I said, because I'm out of town for work and I'm recording this ahead of time, so not a whole lot has happened since the last episode. So, now that we've gotten through the intro, let's go ahead and get to the content. Cannabis has a long history in the state of Kentucky. It is even said by some that it is probably the largest cash crop in the state as it sits right now. Now, we don't consider it to be the largest cash crop because it is still not legal to grow, possess, or consume in this particular state. But hemp, and a lot of the hemp that was used was cultivated from marijuana specifically and has been in this state since the 1700s. So it's a pretty long time for a crop to exist here. A report in 1914 with the USDA indicated that almost all of the hemp grown in the United States is from seed that is produced in Kentucky. And if you're unsure or unaware of why that is, the climate in Kentucky is climate, soil, all the conditions is pretty prime for growing marijuana specifically. There have been a lot of direct correlations made between how marijuana is grown and how tobacco is grown, and they are almost like kissing cousins at this point. So the ability to grow high quality cannabis would exist here in the state. So it would make sense that the seed stock and a large portion of the hemp would come from this particular state. It's really tough to pinpoint when cannabis became considered a drug. Cannabis has been around for a very, 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 very long time. And when did people start saying this thing is different from tobacco? You got to think this is, a different product altogether. There's a really interesting article that exists out here that sort of talks about, there's a really interesting piece of literature that we can look at that is talking about this particular type of relationship with marijuana began. Marijuana was a huge part of Louisville, so we'll just start with Louisville, the sort of the closest to the epicenter of whiskey as you can get. What might have been the state's capital very early on if it had not been for some donations and some severe lobbying, but maybe the commerce center of the state had a couple hundred years of a relationship with marijuana, specifically around hemp. And so we're not talking about the potential psychoactive portion of marijuana. We're talking about the ability to be able to create ropes and using it for rope walks, for anything that you might need to. I mean, you think about anything that was going to need to be moved or done anything with, rope was going to be a big part of it. And so hemp played a big role in that. But kind of pinpointing whenever that transition where, marijuana cigarettes, as they were called at that point in time, or muggles, became a part of history, there is some indication, some concern that around the 1930s is when we start seeing sort of a negative connotation that comes along with marijuana specifically. And that mirrors what's happening in the United States as a whole. We're sitting distinctly smack dab in the middle of prohibition in the United States. And, the sort of Puritan nature that existed around prohibition in 1934, which is, sort of right in that time slot, maybe slightly after prohibition. There's a federal law that takes effect that starts putting fines on the sale of marijuana and punishing people for participating in commerce around that particular drug. The immediate reaction was to give, fines and jail time. And then as time progressed, in time, those marijuana laws are going to become more lenient. They're going to become recognized as not being nearly as dangerous as the initial thoughts were. In many indications, in many places where you read news and you think about news, marijuana is lumped in with things like morphine and opium, and that's things that carry legitimate physiological problems, and addiction becomes physical as opposed to that being mental. One of the things that we know biologically now is that realistically, marijuana might be less harmful than tobacco, and it is definitively less harmful than alcohol. And so the reason why it is illegal is largely political at this point in time. But the state of Kentucky has a super rich history with it. It has been around for quite some time. And so we're going to talk about how that plays into modern bourbon maybe. But why are we talking about it today? Well, today is 420, and 420 is the biggest cannabis-oriented holiday of the year. It is a time when dispensaries will often have significant discounts. If you're talking about Colorado or Illinois or any other number of places, there are celebrations that happen on 4:20 p.m., on 420. It's a cultural phenomenon. So let's talk about how hemp, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, might have some degree of an impact on the whiskey environment. The first place to start is Whistle Pig. And one might think, hey, this is a real weird location to sort of begin. But Whistle Pig launched what is called the Piggyback Devil's Slide. And what that is it's a limited edition line of a non-alcoholic rye. And what does that even mean? Well, non-alcoholic rye means just that, is that it is a spirit that is distilled to 100% rye, it's aged, and then it is undistilled to under 0.5% ABV. One proof. We're down to one proof at this point. What happens at this point is this particular spirit, if we want to even call it that, is now infused with a hemp extract. Hemp extract is going to be closer to what we understand to CBD than it is going to be to legitimate marijuana. And so hemp has become recently re-legalized in this state as, as consumers increase their consumption of CBD oils and CBD-based products. The need for hemp grew as well. State of Kentucky jumps on the front end of that and says, hey, let's start growing hemp to make it a significant cash crop here in the state. And agriculturally, we can talk about what the impact of that was, and I don't know that that's necessarily for this particular episode. Maybe it is a conversation whenever we finally get down the path to the Whistle Pig Piggybacks Devil Full Send, which is going to be a distilled, undistilled rye that is infused with THC liquid at that point. So the intent of this is to be able to take a spirit that you might thoroughly enjoy the flavor of, remove the alcohol from it, and add in, for CBD's state, something that is slightly more therapeutic, and for THC's situation, something that has a completely different impact than what we are traditionally used to experiencing with whiskey specifically. In a similar vein, there's another producer out there doing something equally interesting. And so there is this Sono 1420. So Sono 1420 is a series of whiskeys that are doing something similar. They're not necessarily using hemp seed oil to be able to infuse into their spirits, but what they're doing is they're taking a bourbon mash bill and they are adding in milled hemp seed into their mash bill. And so the mash bill goes 75% corn, 15% rye, and 10% milled hemp seed. So are we extracting CBD at this point? I don't know if you can technically call it that based off of, is the milled hemp seed adding in the CBD that exists within maybe the actual hemp seed oil that is being used in the Whiskey offering? Maybe not. But they're doing the exact same thing with a rye, where they're doing a 75% rye, 15% corn, 10% milled hemp seed offering. And then, of course, they're also doing their own cinnamon whiskey, which is going to be a blend, and then a finished at sea. So they're a finished at sea bourbon that has the hemp seed oil in it as well. Now, how do they come up with this particular name? This name, 1420, is a nod to the distribution of this particular product. The Sono 1420 is expressly limited to the state of Connecticut. And the utilization of this 1420, while might have some connotation around the 420 aspect, it actually has to do with it being a nod to that particular state's Senate to vote 14-20 against alcohol prohibition in 1919. And so they're kind of going back in time and saying, hey, this is a thing that a majority of our representatives in our state were against, but also picking up that, that same through line of 420. Will this gain enough traction to become something that everyone else wants to consume, to purchase later on? Not entirely sure. But we'll see. This is a way that people are able to innovate inside of the whiskey marketplace, but including something that is just as old, if not older, than whiskey in the United States, or at least bourbon in the United States. And one of the last things to sort of toss into this particular episode, this particular discussion, is around Breckenridge Distillery. And if you've been around whiskey for a little while, you probably have a good idea of who Breckenridge is. They're technically the world's highest distillery. Their location in Colorado has everything to do with that. It's a nod to 420, but it's also like legitimately, as far as elevation, the highest distillery. I think they're sitting at somewhere near 10,000 feet. Breckenridge specifically has been around since the late 2000s, and I guess maybe the 2008, 9, 10, somewhere around that time frame. And it was founded by a doctor who decided he wanted to become a distiller, had an obsession with whiskey. Kind of like a lot of these smaller craft distilleries, they're people that were working in other professions and decide, hey, this is a thing that I'm passionate about and I want to jump into it. They make a ton of different stuff: rum, vodka, brandy, whatever else, basically everything. There's an experience here. But Breckenridge has been purchased by a Canadian company, specifically Tilray. And if you do any investing using Robinhood, you know exactly who these people are. Their stocks kind of move around pretty heavily, but they are considered a global cannabis lifestyle and consumer packaged goods company. And so you start asking, like, what does a company that is very heavily invested in the cannabis marketplace have any interest in a distillery in Colorado? Well, it makes some degree of sense if you're interested in making a THC-based product. You're going to have to start in the state of Colorado, and you're not going to be able to necessarily have it taken care of somewhere else. You can't contract distill and, then infuse later on. Like, there's a lot of things that sort of are left to be handled. But the assumption is that they're looking to make some whiskey and THC infused products, being able to enter into a marketplace and produce something of interest, something that folks are into. And, Breckenridge Distillery is a good distillery to purchase to do that with. It's one that has, pretty decent brand recognition, and the combination of revenue from a global organization like this, plus the startup nature of a craft distiller in the state of Colorado. Like all of the stars align to make this a pretty good relationship that could create some really unique offerings. Now, maybe Tilray is not really even interested in a THC whiskey relationship. Maybe they're just interested in a brand that has really, really good reputation and has an opportunity to grow beyond its home state of Colorado. As it kind of picks up notoriety, they can just make money off of it. Maybe they're following through with what a lot of other companies are doing, is acquiring these notable brands that are on their way up. Think about Bardstown Bourbon Company more recently, and a host of other ones, and just want to make a few dollars off of them. But I can't help but imagine that there's going to be some degree of a partnership that exists to make something where these two concepts merge together. Well, this was a quick in and out episode. We'll be probably under 20 minutes for the day. Hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. The next few weeks are going to be really interesting, I think. We've got a series of interviews, and I hate using that term because I want them to be more like conversations, whether it be two friends talking or two people just getting to know each other. That's what I want them to be. But we're going to have, it looks like I should have 4 straight conversations, interviews, whatever you want to call them. 3 of them will likely be recorded and then edited down and replayed. They have more to do with the fact that I like to live stream these things. Just so we can get feedback from people as we talk. But these are going to be 3 of the 4 are going to be in the middle of the day. And so I'm not really sure if I want to live stream those to YouTube. But we'll be able to talk to, over the course of 4 weeks, we'll be able to talk to a few folks from Mammoth Distilling, a couple of people from Penelope. We'll be able to talk to Blue Run Spirits, and we'll be able to talk to the subscription service Blind Barrels. It's going to be super fun, and I'm trying to work out a few other interview conversations that we might be able to have with different folks within the industry, whether they be brands, brand representatives, other social media personalities. I really want to have kind of a broad reach in who we're talking to. Working on trying to get some folks on to talk about American single malt, and get some folks on to talk about Scotch, because those are 2 things that I don't know a ton about, and I want people to have the opportunity to learn about them in a place where they don't feel like they're overwhelmed with information. We'll also probably invite some of our friends from social media, whether they be YouTube people, Instagram people, or podcast people, to come and join me so we can just talk. I mean, the conversation I had with Perry from This Is My Bourbon podcast, and the conversation I had with Morgan from Female Whiskey Society, super fun. Tim and Jack from Monday Night Sucks. These guys, these are always a super fun conversation. So if you are watching this as one of those type of people, or any other person, if you want to join me, if you want to come on and have a discussion about some particular thing, reach out to me. My email address, I've said it at the beginning, I'll say it in the end. You can get a hold of me on social media, wherever, and I am open, and I want to have those conversations, because I said it last week, and I'm going to say it again this week. This concept of Whiskey Church that somebody mentioned about Whiskey Week in Batch 4 has really resonated with me and stuck with me, and I can't get past it. Like there's so much correlation between these 2 concepts, in that this is a place to have conversations, to feel safe, and to learn more, and for us to expand our own learnings about these particular things. So thanks for listening to my rambling. Thanks for joining me. If you're watching this on the replay, I hope you found this entertaining or informative or something. If you did, please leave me a review. Whatever platform that you're on, leave me a review, leave a comment, like it, don't like it. I don't care if it's a good or a bad review. I'd rather just hear from people. I had somebody reach out to me on Instagram and just give me a comment and said, "Hey, I really enjoyed this particular thing," and I'll take that over numbers of downloads and the number of hours that have been streamed. I don't care about that nearly as much as people saying, "Hey, I enjoyed this," or "I didn't like this." Give me some feedback. Give me something. You can do that. You can hit me on Twitter, on Instagram. It is Embellish Pod in both places. At some point in time, if my viewership gets high enough, I'll be able to, on YouTube, I'll be able to capture the Embellish Pod URL, custom URL within YouTube. I think I've got 40 some odd more people to get there, so we're halfway there. which is super shocking because I don't really put a ton of effort into YouTube. It's more of I'm already here recording and I've got a camera in front of me just by the nature of how my office is set up, so why not go ahead and stream that? But you can also find me on my website. It is www.embellishpod.com. All of my links, accounts, contact details, there's email addresses in there. There's a ton of stuff. But until next week, I'll be back with another offering. Should be an interview. Cheers, and thanks for hanging out tonight.